Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. For 70 years, he stood 2 steps behind the throne, the rock, the anchor, the man who never flinched, never wavered, never once let the mask slip in public. Interviewers would ask him about his childhood, and he would shut them down with a single sentence. Change the subject, move on. The question everyone wanted answered was simple. Why was Philip so cold? Why did a man surrounded by the warmth of the most famous family on earth seem incapable of showing vulnerability? The answer wasn't hiding in his naval career, or his marriage, or his decades of royal duty. It was hiding in a single day in 1930, a day that began with a picnic and ended with a 9-year-old boy coming home to find that his mother had vanished. The house at Saint-Cloud sat on the outskirts of Paris like a monument to faded glory. Its rooms were filled with the kind of silence that settles into a home when money has run out and hope is in short supply. This was where Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark spent the first years of his conscious memory. Not in a palace, in a borrowed villa sustained by the charity of relatives and the rapidly diminishing proceeds of an inherited legacy that could barely cover the cost of maintaining appearances. His father, Prince Andrew, had arrived here in disgrace, a man sentenced to death by a revolutionary tribunal in Athens in 1922, and spared only through the personal intervention of King George V. The British monarch had dispatched a warship to extract the family from Greek soil before the firing squad could assemble. The infant Philip had been carried aboard HMS Calypso in a crib fashioned from an orange crate, a detail repeated so often it became the founding myth of his character. The prince, who began life as a refugee. Philip's mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg, a woman of unusual distinction born into the highest circles of European royalty, and cursed with a disability that set her apart from the very beginning. She was congenitally deaf, a condition that forced her to develop an almost supernatural skill at lip reading across multiple languages. She taught herself to speak so fluently that many people failed to realize she could not hear them at all. This talent for concealment, for performing normalcy in a world that would have otherwise excluded her, it became the defining skill of her life. She had married Prince Andrew in 1903, served as a nurse during the Balkan Wars while pregnant, followed her husband into exile with a stoicism that suggested either profound inner strength or the kind of numbness that comes from having absorbed too many blows. By the late 1920s, something inside her began to fracture. The household at St. Cloud in those final years was a study in controlled disintegration. Prince Andrew spent his days composing a lengthy defense of his conduct during the Greco-Turkish War, a document nobody wanted to read, a document that served mainly to remind him daily of everything he had lost. He grew distant from his wife and children, retreating into himself while Alice took on the burden of raising 4 daughters and a young son on a budget that could barely cover the servants. The 4 sisters were approaching marriageable age: Margarita, Theodora, Cecilia, Sophie. Finding them suitable husbands had become a matter of urgent financial necessity as much as social propriety. Philip was the youngest, the only boy, effectively raised by a parade of relatives, governesses, and the intermittent attention of parents who were themselves barely holding on. He would later describe his childhood as one of complete absence of family, a phrase that carried more diagnostic precision than metaphor. The warning signs that Alice was losing her grip on reality emerged gradually at first, then with alarming acceleration. By late 1929, she had begun claiming to receive divine messages, asserting that she had been granted special powers to heal the sick and communicate directly with Christ and Buddha. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic, oscillating between periods of apparent lucidity and episodes of florid religious delusion that left her husband and children helpless to intervene. Prince Andrew responded to her breakdown with the mixture of embarrassment and avoidance that characterized upper-class male responses to female mental illness in that era. He did not want to deal with it. He wanted it to go away, and so he brought in the doctors. The psychiatrists who descended upon the Saint-Cloud household in early 1930 approached Princess Alice's case with clinical detachment. The first to examine her was Thomas Ross, a British psychiatrist who had made his reputation treating shell-shocked soldiers during the Great War. His diagnosis was swift and unequivocal: paranoid schizophrenia. He was followed by Sir Maurice Craig, a physician of even greater eminence who had previously treated the future King George VI for his stammer. Craig confirmed the diagnosis. The family now had two of the most respected psychiatric minds in Britain, telling them that Alice was incurably mad. The decision was made to institutionalize her, not voluntarily, by force. She was to be taken to a sanatorium where she could receive proper treatment, away from the embarrassment her condition was causing the family, away from the children who were witnesses to her deterioration. The challenge was how to accomplish this removal without creating a scene, without alerting the press, without causing lasting trauma to the younger members of the household. And so the adults concocted a plan. The morning of the removal began with ordinary routines. Philip was 9 years old, small for his age, already possessed of the watchful, guarded demeanor that would later become his trademark. He and his sisters were told they were going on an outing, a picnic, something pleasant to get them out of the house for the day. Philip had no reason to suspect anything. Children trust their families. They assume the adults know what they're doing. They assume that when they leave in the morning, the world will be the same when they return. While Philip was gone, the doctors moved in. Princess Alice was sedated, forcibly, loaded into a waiting car bound for a clinic in Berlin. She did not go willingly. She was not given the opportunity to say goodbye to her children. She was simply taken, in the manner of a prisoner being transported to a place of confinement, while her 9-year-old son was somewhere else entirely, eating sandwiches, believing that his mother would be there when he returned. When Philip came home that evening, the house was different. There's no record of exactly who told him, what words they used, whether he cried or simply went silent in the way that children do when they have absorbed a blow too large to process. His sister, Sophie, would later describe the dissolution that followed with clinical brevity. Then we all sort of disappeared, and the house in St. Cloud was closed down. The mother was gone. The home was gone. The family, in any meaningful sense, was gone. Philip would later tell interviewers that he could not remember his mother's face from those years. She had become a kind of ghost in his memory, present but impossible to visualize. From that day in 1930 until the spring of 1937, he would neither see his mother nor receive so much as a birthday card from her. She had vanished as completely as if she had died. Alice's first destination was Kurhaus Schloss Tegel in Berlin, a clinic run by Ernst Zimmel, a Freudian psychoanalyst, a devoted follower of Sigmund Freud, who had absorbed his theories about the relationship between sexual repression and mental illness. Zimmel examined Alice and concluded that her religious delusions were the product of frustrated libido, that she was going mad because she was not having enough sex. This was not an unusual diagnosis for the era. Freudian theory had swept through European psychiatry like a fever. Any number of conditions that had nothing to do with sexuality were being attributed to blocked or misdirected erotic energy. But what Zimmel recommended as treatment was unusual even by the standards of his profession. He consulted Freud directly, and Freud, by 1930 the most famous psychiatrist in the world, offered a recommendation that would haunt Alice for the rest of her life. Her ovaries should be bombarded with X-rays. The purpose was to accelerate the onset of menopause by destroying her reproductive capacity, eliminating the hormonal surge that Freud believed was driving her delusions. In order to kill off her libido, that was the phrase used, the treatment was administered. The X-rays damaged her ovaries, induced early menopause, caused health problems that would persist for decades. Whether they did anything to cure her schizophrenia was never adequately demonstrated. After Berlin, Alice was transferred to the sanatorium of Ludwig Binswanger in Kreuzlingen, Switzerland, another Freudian disciple. His clinic operated on the assumption that patients would benefit from psychoanalysis, rest, and separation from the family circumstances that had allegedly contributed to their breakdown. For Alice, this separation would last more than 2 years. She was confined, medicated, erased from the life of her family. Her husband stopped visiting. Her children were told almost nothing. The woman who had once been a princess, a nurse, a war hero's wife, reduced to a patient number in a file at a Swiss sanatorium. Meanwhile, the family that Alice left behind disintegrated with a speed that suggested it had been held together by little more than her presence. Prince Andrew decamped to the French Riviera, took up residence on the yacht of his mistress, Countess André de Labigne. He had no interest in raising his son, no interest in maintaining the household at Saint-Cloud, no interest in anything except escaping the wreckage of his life into the arms of a woman who expected nothing from him but his company. Philip was left as an orphan with living parents, a child whose mother was locked in a sanatorium, whose father had chosen a mistress over his family. The four sisters pursued the only option available to women of their class and era. They married. Between 1930 and 1931, all four of them wed German princes, scattering to households across Germany at the precise moment when that country was lurching toward catastrophe. At least three of these German princes would later develop close ties to the Nazi Party. Christoph of Hesse became a member of the Waffen-SS. The sisters' marriages created a complication in Philip's biography that he would spend the rest of his life attempting to minimize. But what mattered to the 9-year-old boy was simpler than politics. His sisters were gone too. The house at Saint-Cloud was closed. Philip was passed between relatives like a piece of luggage that nobody particularly wanted but felt obligated to store. He started at Cheam School in England before his mother's breakdown. He was still there when she was taken away. In 1933, at 12, he was sent to Schule Schloss Salem in Germany, a progressive institution run by a Jewish educator named Kurt Hahn. But Hahn was forced to flee Germany almost immediately after Philip arrived. The Nazis had come to power. A Jewish school administrator was no longer safe. After 2 terms, Philip was transferred to Gordonstoun in Scotland, the school that Hahn founded after his escape from the Third Reich. Gordonstoun was a harsh place by design. Its founder believed that physical hardship and cold showers and early morning runs would build character in young men who might otherwise succumb to the softness of privilege. Philip thrived there in a way he had not thrived anywhere else, throwing himself into athletics and leadership roles with an intensity that suggested he was running from something. When he signed guest books at various events, he sometimes wrote his name as Philip of Nowhere. It was a joke, but it was also a statement of fact. He was a prince without a country, a son without parents, a brother whose sisters lived in Nazi Germany and whose mother was locked in a sanatorium. He was from nowhere at all. The moment that brought the scattered family back together was not a reunion. It was a funeral. November 16, 1937. Philip's sister, Cecilia, boarded a Belgian Sabena aircraft in Frankfurt. With her were her husband, Georg Donatus, their 2 young sons, Ludwig and Alexander, and the Dowager Grand Duchess Eleanor. They were flying to London for a wedding. The weather was terrible. Thick fog rolled in from the North Sea as the aircraft approached the Belgian coast. The pilot, unable to see, attempted a landing at Ostend. The plane struck a factory chimney, sheared off a wing and an engine, crashed through the roof of a building, burst into flames. Everyone on board was killed. Cecilia was 8 months pregnant. When rescuers sifted through the wreckage, they found the body of a stillborn infant amid the charred remains. Philip was 16 years old. He had not seen his mother in more than 5 years. He had barely seen his father in nearly as long. Now his sister was dead, the one closest to him in age, along with her husband, her children, her mother-in-law, and the baby who had almost been born in the flames. The funeral was held in Darmstadt on November 23, 1937. For the first time since Alice had been sedated and loaded into a car, the remnants of the family gathered in one place. Prince Andrew arrived from the Riviera, gaunt and diminished, a shadow of the man who had once commanded troops. Princess Alice arrived wearing the austere clothing she would later formalize into a nun's habit. She had been released from the sanatoriums by then, though she remained deeply fragile. The photographs from that day show the teenage Philip marching as a mourner alongside his sister's German relatives. While the crowd gave Nazi salutes, Philip stood silent among the raised arms and swastika armbands. A boy burying his pregnant sister while the machinery of fascism performed its rituals around him. This was Philip's world, a world where family obligation and political horror collided, where grief required him to stand among uniforms that represented everything Britain would soon fight to destroy, where his own blood relatives had become, in every practical sense, the enemy. The adults had tried to protect him with that picnic, to spare him the trauma of watching his mother dragged away. Instead, they had taught him something far more damaging. They had taught him that the people who love you will lie to you, that families can vanish while you're eating sandwiches, that the safest thing to do with feelings is bury them so deep that no one can ever find them, not even yourself. But the story of Princess Alice did not end in a Swiss sanatorium. When Germany occupied Greece in 1943, Alice remained in Athens while most of the Greek royal family fled into exile. She worked for the Red Cross, organized soup kitchens for the starving population, smuggled medical supplies from Sweden through channels that required courage and cunning in equal measure. But her most significant act of resistance was far more personal. She sheltered members of the Cohen family, Rachel Cohen, a Jewish widow, and 2 of her 5 children, in her Athens home, hiding them from the Gestapo for more than a year. When Nazi officers came to interrogate her, she used her deafness as a weapon, pretending not to understand their questions, forcing them to repeat themselves until they grew frustrated and left. The madwoman who had been deemed unfit to raise her own children had risked her life to save a Jewish family from extermination. Prince Andrew died on December 3, 1944, at the Metropole Hotel in Monte Carlo, alone except for his mistress. He had not seen his son in 5 years, had not seen his wife in longer than that. The man who had been sentenced to death for losing a war, who had fled his country on a British warship, who had abandoned his family for a yacht on the Riviera, ended his life in exile from everything he had once been. Philip received the news while serving in the Royal Navy. He did not publicly mourn. He did not speak of what he felt. In 1949, Alice founded the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, a nursing order of Greek Orthodox nuns. She took her vows, donned a gray habit, devoted herself to a life of religious service. The doctors had tried to cure her of her visions. She had responded by building a life around them. The ironic reversal came in 1967. A military coup in Greece had made Athens unsafe for a member of the former royal family. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip invited the elderly Princess Alice to live at Buckingham Palace. The gray-habited nun took up residence in an apartment where she regularly started fires because she insisted on smoking cigarettes despite her advancing age. She died at Buckingham Palace on December 5, 1969, at the age of 84, leaving no possessions because she had given everything away. The son who had come home from a picnic to find her gone was finally there for the end. He was present at her deathbed in a way that neither of them had been present for each other during the decades when it might have mattered most. In 1993, Princess Alice was recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations, the highest honor Israel bestows upon non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish people during the Holocaust. In 1994, Prince Philip traveled to Jerusalem to accept the honor on her behalf. Standing in the Hall of Remembrance while a speaker described his mother's courage in terms that no psychiatric diagnosis could contain, he planted a tree in her memory. He was asked afterward what his mother would have thought of the recognition. He said she would have been surprised, that she would have insisted she had done nothing extraordinary, that she had simply done what anyone would have done. But Philip knew better than anyone that this was not true. Her body was transferred to Jerusalem in 1988 and interred at the Church of St. Mary Magdalene on the Mount of Olives. Beside the remains of her Aunt Grand Duchess Elizabeth, it was what she had wanted, to be buried in the Holy Land, close to the God who had spoken to her in visions that the doctors had tried to X-ray out of existence. The boy who had been sent on a picnic while his mother was dragged away in a sedated stupor became the patriarch of the most powerful family on earth. The woman diagnosed as incurably insane became one of the unsung heroes of the Holocaust. The family that dissolved in 1930 Scattered across Europe by madness and betrayal, and the casual cruelty of men who did not know how to love their children, was only reunited at last in the places where the dead are honored. Philip lived until 2021, dying at Windsor Castle at the age of 99, having served as consort of Queen Elizabeth II for 73 years. Every interviewer who ever asked him about his childhood received the same treatment: clipped answers, changed subjects, the conversational equivalent of a door slammed shut. He did not discuss what it felt like to be abandoned. He did not discuss the years without a mother. He did not discuss the father who chose a mistress over his children, or the sisters who married Nazis, or the family home that was closed and sold and erased from existence. He had learned the lesson of 1930 too well to ever unlearn it. Feelings are dangerous, and the only safe thing to do with them is bury them so deep that no one can ever find them.